That night in Memphis, as Elvis was preparing to take the stage, when he noticed the young couple crying among the audience, no one expected the concert to be canceled. But when Elvis learned why that couple was crying, he understood that even at the cost of disappointing thousands of fans, he had to help them, because a true king could never ignore any parent's tears. Maria and Carlos Hernandez had never imagined that their love story would become intertwined with one of the most extraordinary acts of compassion in music history. The young couple, both 25 years old, had met 3 years earlier at a community college in Memphis, where Maria was studying to become a teacher, and Carlos was working toward his degree in automotive repair while supporting himself as a mechanic at a local garage. Their romance had blossomed slowly and beautifully, built on shared dreams, mutual respect, and a deep appreciation for music that had brought them together during late-night study sessions in the college library. Both came from working-class Hispanic families who had immigrated to Memphis in search of better opportunities, and both understood the value of hard work, perseverance, and the importance of supporting each other through life's challenges. Music had always been a central part of their relationship. During their courtship, Carlos would often bring his guitar to Maria's apartment, and they would spend hours singing together, everything from traditional Mexican ballads that reminded them of their cultural heritage to contemporary American songs that represented their hopes for their future in their adopted country. Elvis Presley held a special place in their hearts, not just because of his music, but because he represented something they both understood deeply: the ability to bridge different worlds, to bring people together across cultural divides, and to express emotions that transcended language barriers. Elvis's music spoke to their experiences as young people, trying to build a life in America while honoring their heritage. When Maria and Carlos married in a small ceremony at their local Catholic church, attended by close family and friends, their first dance was to "Love Me Tender," played by a mariachi band that Carlos's uncle had arranged as a wedding gift. The fusion of Elvis's melody with traditional Mexican instrumentation seemed to perfectly symbolize their hopes for a life that would honor both their past and their future. After their marriage, Maria and Carlos moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Memphis. Maria found a position teaching 2nd grade at an elementary school in a predominantly Hispanic area of the city, where her bilingual skills and natural empathy made her beloved by both students and parents. Carlos continued working as a mechanic while taking night classes to complete his degree, with dreams of eventually opening his own automotive repair shop. For 2 years, their life together was everything they had hoped for. They were deeply in love, financially stable enough to cover their basic needs, and filled with optimism about their future. They talked frequently about starting a family, and Maria had begun preparing one of their spare rooms as a nursery, carefully saving money to buy baby furniture and decorating the walls with cheerful colors and images. Their dreams seemed to be coming true when Maria discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1976. The joy they felt was indescribable. They had been trying to conceive for over a year, and the news that they were finally going to become parents felt like the greatest blessing they could have received. Maria's pregnancy progressed normally through the first 2 trimesters. She continued teaching, though she had to modify some of her activities due to morning sickness and fatigue. Carlos became even more devoted and attentive, taking on extra work to ensure they would have sufficient savings for the baby's arrival, and spending his evenings reading parenting books and assembling the crib they had purchased at a secondhand store and lovingly refinished together. They attended every prenatal appointment together, marveling at ultrasound images of their growing baby and discussing names, nursery themes, and all the dreams they had for their child's future. Maria would often play Elvis's music softly while resting in the evenings, believing that exposing their unborn baby to beautiful melodies would somehow contribute to the child's development. But during Maria's 32nd week of pregnancy, their perfect world began to collapse in ways they never could have imagined. Maria had been experiencing some unusual symptoms: severe headaches, swelling in her hands and feet that seemed more extreme than normal pregnancy-related swelling, and vision problems that came and went without warning. Initially, her obstetrician assured them that these symptoms, while concerning, were not uncommon in the later stages of pregnancy. But when Maria's blood pressure readings became dangerously elevated during a routine appointment, Dr. Patricia Williams, her physician, became seriously alarmed. "Maria, I need you to go to the hospital immediately," Dr. Williams said with the kind of calm urgency that healthcare professionals use when they're trying not to panic their patients while ensuring quick action. "Your blood pressure is much too high, and combined with your other symptoms, I'm concerned about a condition called preeclampsia." Maria and Carlos had never heard of preeclampsia, but Dr. Williams's explanation was terrifying. It was a pregnancy-related condition that could be life-threatening for both mother and baby if not treated immediately and aggressively. In severe cases, it could lead to seizures, organ failure, and death. At the hospital, a team of specialists confirmed Dr. Williams's diagnosis. Maria's condition was not just preeclampsia, but its most severe form, known as HELLP syndrome, a constellation of symptoms that included the breakdown of red blood cells, elevated liver enzymes, and dangerously low platelet counts. "We need to deliver the baby immediately," Dr. Robert Chen, the maternal fetal medicine specialist, explained to the frightened couple. "Maria's life is in immediate danger, and every hour we wait increases the risk of catastrophic complications." But the baby, at 32 weeks gestation, was not yet ready for life outside the womb. Dr. Chen explained that while babies born at 32 weeks could survive with intensive medical care, they faced significant risks of complications, including respiratory distress, brain hemorrhages, and long-term developmental problems. "What are our options?" Carlos asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he held Maria's hand. "There are no options, doctor," Chen replied gently but firmly. "If we don't deliver the baby within the next few hours, Maria will likely suffer seizures, and both she and the baby could die." The emergency cesarean section was performed that same evening. Maria was heavily sedated and barely conscious during the procedure, while Carlos waited in the hospital corridor, praying to every saint he could remember and promising God that he would do anything if his wife and child could both survive. Their daughter, Isabella Rose Hernandez, was born weighing only 3 pounds and 2 ounces. She was immediately transferred to the neonatal intensive care unit, where she was connected to a ventilator and multiple monitoring devices that tracked every aspect of her tiny body's struggle to function in a world she wasn't quite ready to enter. Maria's recovery was complicated and frightening. The preeclampsia had affected her liver and kidneys, and for several days, doctors weren't certain whether she would survive. Carlos spent every possible moment at the hospital, dividing his time between Maria's bedside and the NICU, where Isabella fought for her life in an incubator that seemed impossibly large for her tiny body. For 3 weeks, Isabella's condition remained critical but stable. She was making slow progress, gaining a few ounces, gradually needing less respiratory support, and beginning to show the kind of responses that doctors considered encouraging signs. Maria had recovered enough to spend time in the NICU, holding Isabella for brief periods and talking to her in soft Spanish and English, telling her stories about the family who was waiting to take her home. But during Isabella's 4th week of life, she developed a serious infection that was common among premature babies, but potentially deadly. Her tiny immune system, already compromised by her early arrival, couldn't fight off the bacteria that had invaded her bloodstream. "We're doing everything we can, doctor," Sarah Martinez, the neonatologist, explained to Maria and Carlos as they watched their daughter's vital signs fluctuate on the monitors surrounding her incubator. "But you need to understand that the next 48 hours are critical. If she can fight off this infection, her prognosis improves significantly. If not..." Dr. Martinez didn't need to finish the sentence. Maria and Carlos understood that their baby daughter might die, and there was nothing they could do to prevent it except pray and hope. During those agonizing hours, as they took turns sitting beside Isabella Isabella's incubator and whispering words of love and encouragement to their fighting daughter, Carlos remembered something that might bring them both comfort during this impossible time. He had seen an advertisement in the Memphis newspaper announcing that Elvis Presley would be performing at the Mid-South Coliseum for 3 nights in December. The concerts were scheduled to begin in just 2 days, and Carlos thought that perhaps experiencing the music that had meant so much to their relationship might provide some emotional respite during their vigil. "Maria," he said quietly as they sat in the NICU waiting room during one of the periods when they weren't allowed to be with Isabella, "maybe we should try to go to the Elvis concert tomorrow night. Just for a few hours. The doctors said there's nothing more we can do right now except wait, and maybe the music would help us feel a little less helpless." Maria's initial reaction was to refuse. How could they possibly leave the hospital when their daughter was fighting for her life? How could they justify enjoying themselves when Isabella needed them? But Carlos persisted gently. "The nurses said they would call us immediately if anything changes. We'll only be gone for 3 hours, and maybe hearing Elvis sing will remind us that there's still beauty in the world, even when everything feels dark." Finally, after much discussion and many assurances from the nursing staff that they would be contacted instantly if Isabella's condition changed, Maria agreed to attend the concert. They purchased the least expensive tickets available, though even those represented a significant expense for a couple dealing with mounting medical bills and Carlos's reduced work schedule due to time spent at the hospital. On the evening of the concert, Maria and Carlos arrived at the Mid-South Coliseum feeling emotionally exhausted and conflicted. Part of them was excited to see Elvis perform, but their hearts remained in the hospital with their critically ill daughter. They had spoken with the NICU nurses just before leaving, and Isabella's condition remained unchanged, stable but precarious. As they settled into their seats in the upper level of the arena, Maria began crying quietly. The combination of stress, exhaustion, hormonal changes from her recent pregnancy, and the overwhelming fear about Isabella's survival had finally reached a breaking point. "I don't know if I can do this, Carlos," she whispered through her tears. "What if something happens to Isabella while we're here? What if she needs us and we're not there?" Carlos put his arm around his wife, fighting back his own tears. "She knows we love her, Maria, and sometimes we need to take care of ourselves so we can take care of her. The doctors said the music might actually help us cope with the stress." But as the lights dimmed and the audience began cheering in anticipation of Elvis's entrance, Maria's crying intensified rather than subsided. The joy and excitement surrounding them felt almost offensive given their personal tragedy. How could people be so happy when their world was falling apart? Elvis's opening number was "That's All Right," and the crowd immediately erupted in enthusiastic singing and applause. But instead of lifting Maria's spirits, the music made her feel even more isolated and sad. Everyone around them was celebrating, while she and Carlos were living through the worst experience of their lives. During the third song, "Love Me Tender," the same song that had been their wedding dance, Maria broke down completely. The beautiful melody that had once represented their hopes and dreams now seemed to mock their current reality. She began sobbing so intensely that other audience members turned to look at them with concern. Carlos was torn between comforting his wife and his own emotional breakdown. Seeing Maria in such distress, combined with his own fear about Isabella and exhaustion from weeks of hospital vigils, pushed him beyond his emotional limits. Soon, both of them were crying openly, holding each other and feeling utterly lost in their grief and fear. What they didn't know was that Elvis had noticed them from the stage. Despite performing for thousands of people, Elvis had always possessed an remarkable ability to connect with individual audience members, especially when someone appeared to be in distress. Something about the young couple's obvious anguish had caught his attention, and he found himself watching them between songs, wondering what could be causing such intense sadness. During the brief pause between "Love Me Tender" and his next scheduled song, Elvis did something unprecedented. Instead of continuing with his planned set list, he stopped the show and addressed the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis Elvis said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system. I can see that we have some folks in the audience tonight who are going through a difficult time. Sometimes music can heal, but sometimes people need more than music. They need someone to acknowledge their pain and let them know they're not alone. The arena fell silent as Elvis gestured toward the section where Maria and Carlos were sitting. I'd like to invite the young couple who's been crying to come backstage after the show. I don't know what you're going through, but I want you to know that someone sees your pain, and maybe we can talk about it. Maria and Carlos were stunned. They had never imagined that Elvis could see them individually among thousands of people, let alone that he would interrupt his concert to acknowledge their distress. The audience around them began looking in their direction, some with curiosity, others with obvious sympathy. But Elvis wasn't finished. As he continued to watch Maria and Carlos, he made an even more dramatic decision that would shock everyone present, including his own band and management team. You know what? Elvis said, stepping away from the microphone stand and walking to the edge of the stage. I think that couple needs attention right now, not later. Sometimes the most important thing an entertainer can do is stop entertaining and start caring. Elvis turned to his band and said something that the audience couldn't hear, but the band members' expressions of surprise and confusion were visible to everyone in the arena. Then Elvis returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do something I've never done before in my career. I'm going to end this concert early because I believe that young couple needs someone to talk to them right now, and that's more important than finishing our show. The audience erupted in a mixture of applause, confusion, and disappointed murmurs. Many people couldn't understand why Elvis would cancel a concert for two strangers, while others were moved by his compassion and spontaneous prioritization of human need over entertainment. Elvis continued, I want everyone to understand something. Music is supposed to heal people, bring them together, and remind them that they're not alone. If I can't use my platform to help people when they're hurting, then I'm not doing my job as an entertainer or as a human being. Within minutes, Elvis's security team had located Maria and Carlos and was escorting them backstage, past confused and curious audience members who were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Backstage, Elvis immediately approached the couple with genuine warmth and concern. He was still wearing his iconic white jumpsuit, but his demeanor was completely different from his stage persona, gentle, caring, and focused entirely on their needs. I'm Elvis, he said simply, as if they might not know who he was. And I could see from the stage that you two are going through something really difficult. I don't know what it is, but I want you to know that whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone. Maria was still crying, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. Here she was in the midst of the worst crisis of her life, being comforted by one of the most famous people in the world who had just canceled his concert to talk to her. Carlos found his voice first. Mr. Presley, I don't know why you did this for us, but our baby daughter is in the hospital fighting for her life. She was born too early, and now she has an infection, and the doctors don't know if she's going to make it. Elvis's expression immediately softened with understanding and compassion. Oh, honey, he said to Maria, I'm so sorry. There's nothing harder in this world than having a sick child. How old is your baby? 4 weeks, Maria managed to say between sobs. She was born at 32 weeks, and she's been in the NICU ever since. We almost lost her during delivery, and now you're scared you might lose her anyway, Elvis finished gently. I understand. I have a daughter too, and I can't imagine what you're going through. Elvis spent the next 2 hours with Maria and Carlos, listening to their story, asking thoughtful questions about Isabella's condition, and sharing his own experiences with fear, loss, and the power of hope. He talked about his mother's death and how that had shaped his understanding of grief, and he spoke about his belief that love could transcend physical limitations and that parents' love for their children could create healing energy that defied medical explanation. I want you to know something, Elvis told them as their conversation continued, and I want you to remember this when things get scary. That little girl chose you to be her parents for a reason. She's fighting so hard because she knows how much love is waiting for her when she gets strong enough to come home. But Elvis didn't stop at emotional support. When he learned about the couple's financial struggles, Carlos had been missing work to be at the hospital, and their insurance didn't cover all of Isabella's expensive NICU care. Elvis immediately took action. "I want to help with Isabella's medical expenses," Elvis said without hesitation, "and I want to make sure you don't have to worry about money while you're worried about your daughter." Maria and Carlos were overwhelmed by this offer. They had never asked for financial help, and they couldn't understand why a stranger, even a famous one, would want to help them. "We can't accept that," Carlos said. "You don't even know us." "I know enough," Elvis replied. "I know you're good people who love their child and are doing everything they can in an impossible situation. That's all I need to know." Elvis arranged for his business manager to contact the hospital and establish a fund to cover all of Isabella's medical expenses, both current and future. He also ensured that Carlos wouldn't lose income during Isabella's hospitalization by arranging for a monthly stipend that would cover their living expenses. But perhaps most importantly, Elvis promised to visit Isabella personally when her condition improved enough to allow visitors outside the immediate family. "I want to meet this little fighter," Elvis said, "and I want to sing to her. I believe music can help babies heal, especially when it comes from someone who cares about them." 3 days after their meeting with Elvis, Isabella's infection began to respond to treatment. Her fever broke, her breathing improved, and for the first time in over a week, the doctors expressed cautious optimism about her prognosis. A week later, when Isabella was stable enough for extended visits, Elvis arrived at the hospital with his guitar. He had arranged for a private meeting in one of the NICU's family consultation rooms, where Isabella's incubator could be moved temporarily to allow for his visit. What followed was one of the most touching scenes that any of the hospital staff had ever witnessed. Elvis, still in his casual clothes rather than his stage costumes, sat beside Isabella's incubator and sang softly to the tiny baby who was finally beginning to thrive. He sang "Love Me Tender, Can't Help Falling in Love," and several gospel songs that he felt would create a peaceful, healing atmosphere. Isabella, who had been restless and difficult to comfort, seemed to calm immediately when Elvis began singing. Her vital signs stabilized, and she appeared to be listening intently to the music. "She knows," Maria whispered to Carlos as they watched Elvis sing to their daughter. "She knows that someone special is here for her." Elvis continued visiting Isabella regularly throughout her remaining time in the NICU. Each visit included music, but also conversations with Maria and Carlos about parenting, hope, and the importance of believing in miracles even when medical science couldn't guarantee outcomes. Isabella's journey home from the hospital after 12 weeks in the NICU represented far more than medical recovery. It symbolized the triumph of love, community support, and the power of human connection to facilitate healing. By the time of her discharge, she weighed 6 pounds and was breathing completely on her own. Her doctors called her recovery remarkable. The home that Isabella entered was significantly different from the modest apartment where Maria and Carlos had begun their journey as expectant parents. Elvis's ongoing support had eliminated their financial stress and allowed them to focus entirely on Isabella's care and their own emotional healing. Elvis's custom mobile, featuring musical notes and symbols representing Isabella's journey, hung above her crib as a constant reminder of the love and support that had surrounded her from her earliest days. The first few weeks at home were challenging, but gradually, as Isabella continued to thrive, their home life began to find a natural rhythm. Elvis continued to visit the family regularly, and Isabella clearly recognized his voice from his earliest visits to the NICU. She would become calm and attentive whenever he sang to her. During one particularly memorable visit when Isabella was 6 months old, Elvis brought his guitar and performed an impromptu concert in their living room. Isabella clapped her hands and made happy sounds throughout the performance. "Look at her," Elvis said, as Isabella reached toward his guitar with obvious fascination. "She's going to be musical, just like her parents. That fighting spirit that got her through the NICU is going to help her achieve amazing things." When Isabella reached her first birthday, a milestone that had once seemed impossible, Elvis arranged for the party to be held at Graceland. The celebration featured live music and speeches from Dr. Martinez and the nursing staff who had cared for Isabella during her earliest weeks. 6. Isabella represents hope, Dr. Martinez said during her remarks, not just for her own family, but for every family that faces the fear and uncertainty of having a critically ill child. Her story reminds us that with excellent medical care, family love, and community support, babies can overcome tremendous challenges. The party also served as a fundraising event for the Isabella Fund, which had grown into a substantial foundation providing ongoing support for families dealing with pediatric medical emergencies. The success led Elvis to establish an annual tradition of hosting parties for children who had overcome significant medical challenges. As Isabella continued to grow and develop, she exceeded expectations in ways that delighted her parents and medical team. By age 2, she was walking, talking, and showing no signs of the developmental delays that sometimes affect children born prematurely. Isabella is proof that babies born prematurely can go on to live completely normal, healthy lives, her pediatrician explained during one of Isabella's routine checkups. Her early medical challenges don't define her future possibilities. Maria returned to teaching when Isabella was 2 years old, finding that her perspective on her students had been profoundly changed by her own experience. Every child in my classroom now reminds me of Isabella, Maria explained. I see each of them as someone's miracle, someone's hope. Carlos eventually fulfilled his dream of opening his own automotive repair shop, naming it Isabella's Garage, and establishing a policy of providing free services to families dealing with medical emergencies. When Isabella graduated from high school 18 years later, Elvis sent a congratulatory message that reflected not just his pride in her individual achievement, but his understanding of what her success represented. Isabella, the message read, your graduation represents the triumph of love over fear, community over isolation, and hope over despair. You have grown into exactly the kind of young woman your parents dreamed you would become, and your journey has inspired countless other families to believe in the possibility of miracles. Isabella chose to study nursing in college, directly inspired by the care she had received during her earliest weeks of life. The nurses who took care of me when I was a baby saved my life, Isabella explained during her college interviews. I want to be that kind of nurse for other families, someone who provides not just medical care, but hope and human connection during the scariest times in people's lives. The legacy of that canceled concert continued to influence how entertainers approached their relationships with audiences and their responsibilities as public figures. Music industry professionals began teaching courses about compassionate celebrity, the understanding that fame and influence come with opportunities and obligations to contribute positively to society. Elvis's decision that night had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing a performer can do is to stop performing and simply be present with people who need human connection. It demonstrated that true artistry involves not just technical skill and commercial success, but the wisdom to understand when and how to use one's gifts for the greatest possible good. Years later, when music historians discuss the most important moments in Elvis's career, many would point not to his famous television appearances, record-breaking concerts, or commercial achievements, but to that night in Memphis when he chose compassion over commerce and taught the world that sometimes the most meaningful performance happens off-stage, in quiet moments, when one human being reaches out to help another family navigate their darkest hour. The photograph of Elvis holding baby Isabella during one of his hospital visits became one of the most treasured images in music history, not because it captured a celebrity moment, but because it represented the intersection of fame and humanity, showing that the greatest stars are those who understand that their light is meant to illuminate the path for others who are struggling to find their way. The story of Elvis canceling his concert to help Maria and Carlos became legendary in Memphis and throughout the music industry. It demonstrated not just Elvis's personal compassion, but his understanding that entertainment should serve humanity rather than the other way around. The concert that Elvis had canceled was never rescheduled in the traditional sense. Instead, Elvis arranged for a special benefit concert several months later, with all proceeds going to support the NICU where Isabella had been treated and other families facing similar crises. "That night taught me something important," Elvis said during an interview years later. "Sometimes the most important performance is the one you don't give. Sometimes people need you to stop being an entertainer and start being a human being." Maria and Carlos remained friends with Elvis for the rest of his life. They considered him not just a musical icon, but a member of their extended family who had been present during their darkest hour and had helped them find light. Isabella grew up knowing the story of how Elvis had helped save her life, though Maria and Carlos were careful to emphasize that it was the doctors and nurses who had provided the medical care, while Elvis had provided something equally important: hope, love, and the reminder that strangers could become family during times of crisis. When Isabella graduated from high school 18 years later, Elvis sent a congratulatory message that read, "To the little fighter who taught me that love is stronger than fear, and that sometimes the most important audience is an audience of one. Congratulations on your graduation, and thank you for showing me what it means to never give up." The legacy of that canceled concert extended far beyond one family's experience. It inspired other entertainers to consider how they might use their platforms to help people in crisis, and it led to the establishment of programs that connected musicians with families facing medical emergencies. Hospital social workers began incorporating music therapy into their support programs for families with sick children, understanding that healing involved more than just medical treatment. It required addressing the emotional and spiritual needs of patients and families. Years later, when people asked about the most important moment of Elvis's career, those who knew the story of Maria, Carlos, and Isabella would point not to his famous television appearances or record-breaking concerts, but to that night in Memphis when he chose compassion over commerce and taught the world that true greatness is measured by how we respond to others' suffering. The photograph of Elvis holding Isabella during one of his hospital visits became one of the most treasured images in music history, not because it captured a celebrity moment, but because it represented the intersection of fame and humanity, showing that the most powerful thing any of us can do is to use our gifts in service of love. In the end, Elvis's decision to cancel his concert for two grieving parents proved that sometimes the most important performance is the one that happens off stage, in quiet moments when one human being reaches out to comfort another. It reminded everyone who heard the story that we all have the power to choose compassion over convenience, and that love really is the strongest force in the universe.